Welcome to Whispered Tales. Today, we explore a heartfelt story about discovering how to be happy alone. Stay with us as we follow a journey that may reflect your own path toward peace, independence, and self-love. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Portland when Lucas Bennett realized just how long it had been since he truly enjoyed his own company. At 31, he had spent most of his adult life trying to fill every empty space around him. Texting people just to feel connected, attending gatherings he didn't care for, or jumping into relationships simply to avoid loneliness. But now, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel before: the weight of being alone. Not the peaceful kind of alone, but the kind that made the room feel too quiet and the hours stretch painfully slow. He stared at the window, watching raindrops gather and slide down the glass, thinking, why does being alone feel like something I need to escape? Lucas had ended a long-term relationship a few months earlier, not because he didn't care, but because they had grown in completely different directions. And while the breakup was necessary, the silence that followed felt overwhelming. He filled his days with distractions: work, errands, podcasts playing in the background just to drown out his thoughts. But the moment he slowed down, even for a second, loneliness would wrap around him like a cold blanket. It wasn't that he disliked himself. He just didn't know himself outside of other people. One afternoon, after work, Lucas walked into a small thrift store to pass time. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, maybe just something to distract his mind. As he wandered, he stumbled across a shelf filled with old books and journals. One leather-bound journal caught his eye. It wasn't new or polished. The edges were worn, and some pages were yellowed with age. He opened it and realized it wasn't blank. Someone had filled it years ago with entries about solitude, healing, and rediscovering oneself. The first line on the first page read, "Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. One is a quiet space. The other is a quiet ache." Those words struck something deep inside Lucas. They didn't scare him. Instead, they made him curious. He bought the journal for $2 and carried it home, feeling an odd sense of comfort. That night, he sat on his couch, the journal resting on his lap, and read through page after page of reflections written by someone who had clearly once struggled with the same emptiness he felt now. The writer talked about learning to sit with silence, creating routines that brought joy, understanding one's emotions, and building a life that didn't rely on others for fulfillment. Lucas felt something shift inside him, something small but important. For the first time, he didn't see being alone as a punishment. He saw it as a possibility, a space to grow, to breathe, to rebuild. Maybe even a chance to discover who he really was beneath the noise of expectations and relationships. He took a slow breath and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is where I start." And just like that, without any dramatic moment or sudden clarity, Lucas began his quiet journey toward learning how to be happy alone, not by escaping solitude, but by understanding it. Over the next several days, Lucas carried the thrifted journal with him everywhere. tucked inside his backpack while commuting, sitting beside his laptop at work, resting on his nightstand before he fell asleep. He wasn't sure why it fascinated him so much. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, he felt like someone truly understood what he was going through, even though they had written their thoughts long before he found them. Every entry felt like a gentle guide, showing him that being alone didn't have to feel like an emotional void. It could become a space of discovery. One evening, he stopped at a local cafe after work. The place was warm, with golden lights and the soft sound of coffee machines humming in the background. He sat by the large window, opened the journal, and reread a line he had underlined the night before. Your own company becomes peaceful the moment you stop demanding it to feel like somebody else's. Lucas let that thought settle, realizing how much pressure he had placed on himself. He expected being alone to feel exciting or comforting immediately, as if solitude owed him something. But maybe being alone wasn't the problem. Maybe his fear of it was. He took a slow sip of his coffee and decided to try something he had been avoiding for months. Sitting with himself without reaching for distractions. No phone, no music, no scrolling. Just himself and the quiet. At first, the silence felt awkward, almost uncomfortable. His mind kept searching for something to do. But after a few minutes, he noticed how peaceful the world felt around him. The soft chatter, the clinking of cups, the rain tapping lightly against the window. And for the first time, he didn't feel lonely sitting by himself. He felt present, awake, connected to the moment instead of rushing to escape it. That night, Lucas walked home through the cool air, feeling strangely grounded. He realized that solitude wasn't an empty space. It was a blank canvas. It was an opportunity to fill his life with things he genuinely enjoyed, not because someone else suggested them, but because they brought him joy. He began experimenting with small changes. He cooked a complicated pasta dish just because he felt like learning something new. He played old jazz records and danced around his living room. He even spent a Saturday morning exploring a park he had passed 100 times but never visited. At first, these small adventures felt foreign, like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. But soon, he started noticing something important. He was laughing more, smiling more, feeling more. One evening, while reorganizing his apartment, he caught himself humming softly, not because someone was there to hear him, but simply because he felt at ease. That's when he realized something that surprised him. He didn't just tolerate being alone, he was beginning to enjoy it. He still had moments where loneliness crept in, of course. Some nights, the quiet felt too heavy, and he wished someone was sitting beside him. But instead of panicking or reaching for instant comfort, he opened the journal and read the same sentence again and again. Happiness alone begins with choosing yourself every day, even when the world feels silent. And slowly, Lucas began choosing himself, not out of habit or obligation, but because he finally understood he was worth choosing. Lucas soon realized that learning to be happy alone
wasn't just about filling his time or finding distractions.
It was about understanding himself, his likes, dislikes, fears and dreams, and being honest with what he truly wanted. He began keeping a small notebook, separate from the journal, writing down questions about his life that he had never dared to ask before. What makes me feel alive? What do I enjoy doing even if no one is watching? What kind of mornings make me feel peaceful? Some answers came easily, like a soft memory of playing guitar as a teenager. Others took time, buried beneath layers of self-doubt and routine. But every answer he wrote made him feel a little more grounded in his own presence. One weekend, Lucas decided to take a solo trip to the Oregon coast. He rented a small cabin overlooking the cliffs, a place where the wind was strong, the waves relentless, and the sky expansive. At first, the solitude felt intense. Even though he had prepared for a quiet weekend alone, being completely by himself made him confront his own thoughts, the ones he had spent years trying to avoid. For the first few hours, he felt restless, pacing the cabin, opening drawers, and checking the view repeatedly. But as the sun began to set, painting the ocean in shades of orange and lavender, something inside him shifted. He felt awe, gratitude, and wonder all at once. And in that moment, he realized he didn't need anyone else to experience beauty. He could feel it fully, entirely, all on his own. During the nights at the cabin, he lit candles, brewed tea, and opened his journal. He reflected on the past, his fears, and the moments he had relied too heavily on others for happiness. He thought about friendships that had faded, relationships that ended, and countless occasions where he had ignored his own needs to make others comfortable. Slowly, he began to forgive himself for those choices, not harshly, but with compassion. He realized that happiness alone didn't mean isolating himself from people. It meant learning to be enough for himself first, so that any connection with others became a choice, not a necessity. When Lucas returned home, he noticed the small things he had never appreciated before. A quiet evening with a book, cooking a meal without distraction, or walking around the city without a single plan. He discovered that the smallest routines could bring immense satisfaction if he allowed himself to experience them fully. He even started journaling daily, noting what made him happy, what challenged him, and moments where he felt connected to himself. With each entry, he felt more confident in the simple truth: he was capable of creating his own joy without relying on someone else's presence to validate it. One evening, as he walked along the riverside trail near his apartment, Lucas paused to watch the city lights reflected in the water. The cool wind brushed his face, and he realized he wasn't longing for anyone's company, not because he didn't value others, but because he had learned the rare, quiet joy of being entirely his own companion. He smiled softly, whispering to himself, "I am enough. I am happy in my own company." And for the first time in a long time, he truly believed it. Lucas discovered that being happy alone wasn't about constant excitement or grand gestures. It was about creating small, meaningful rituals that grounded him in his own life. He started mornings with stretches by the window, watching the sunrise while sipping hot tea. He learned to cook meals slowly, savoring every bite instead of rushing through them like he once did. He even began taking long walks without headphones, letting himself notice the crunch of fallen leaves, the distant laughter of children, and the soft murmur of the city. Each moment, he realized, was more vivid and satisfying because he experienced it fully on his own terms. He also explored his hobbies with a new sense of freedom. Lucas dusted off his guitar, something he hadn't touched in years, and started playing without worrying if anyone was listening or judging. He painted small canvases, experimented with writing short stories, and even tried meditating for a few minutes each day. At first, these activities felt awkward, as if the world expected him to share them, to seek approval, or to prove something. But slowly he understood that his happiness wasn't dependent on external validation. These moments of joy were purely for him, and that made them even more powerful. One afternoon, Lucas met an old friend, Sarah, for coffee. She noticed the change immediately. She said, "You seem different, happier somehow." Lucas smiled, realizing she was right. But the difference wasn't in how he looked or how he acted, it was in how he felt internally. He had stopped clinging to relationships or circumstances to define his value. He had embraced the quiet power of being content alone. He explained, in simple terms, that he had been learning to enjoy his own company. Sarah nodded, smiling knowingly, as if she understood that he had discovered something most people spend a lifetime searching for. Even in moments when loneliness surfaced, like rainy evenings when the city lights blurred through his window, or late nights when he heard the distant hum of life outside, he no longer feared it. He learned to sit with the feeling, acknowledge it, and let it pass naturally, without trying to escape. He realized that loneliness was simply a reminder of connection. It didn't define him, nor did it diminish his worth. In fact, embracing these quiet moments made him more self-aware, patient, and grateful for the life he was shaping on his own.
By now, Lucas had begun to cherish solitude as an essential part of his life. He wasn't rushing to fill his time or distract himself from being alone. Instead, he was building a life that made him feel alive, independent, and content. He had discovered that happiness alone wasn't about avoiding the world, it was about learning to thrive within it, starting with himself. And as he sat one evening by the riverside trail, watching the sunset reflect on the water, he whispered softly, "I am enough. I am complete. I am happy in my own life." Lucas soon realized that being happy alone wasn't a destination, it was a practice. Some days came easily, with laughter, creativity, and calmness flowing naturally. Other days, old patterns of anxiety and doubt crept in, reminding him of the years he had relied on others to define his worth. But instead of running from those feelings, he learned to greet them with curiosity. He would pause, ask himself why he felt unsettled, and respond with patience. Over time, this quiet dialogue became a foundation for resilience and self-assurance. He discovered that the key to happiness alone wasn't ignoring discomfort. It was facing it, understanding it, and allowing himself to be present despite it. He also explored new ways to connect with himself, with nature, and with the world around him without dependency on anyone else's presence. Lucas began taking weekend hikes, photographing landscapes, and keeping a nature journal to track subtle changes in seasons. On rainy days, he would curl up by the window with music, a warm drink, and a book he had been meaning to read for months. He found that joy could be found in small, ordinary moments: the smell of fresh rain, the texture of a well-worn book, the soft notes of a piano piece drifting through his apartment. And these joys were richer because they were fully his. One Friday evening, Lucas attended a small open mic night at a local cafe, not to perform or seek attention, but simply to be present. He watched performers share poetry, music, and stories, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of belonging without the pressure of participation. He realized that happiness alone didn't mean isolation. It meant choosing when and how to connect, guided by desire rather than necessity. The performer's courage inspired him, not because they were observed by an audience, but because they were fully themselves. That night, Lucas understood that living happily alone allowed him to appreciate others without losing himself.
Reduce noise. Lucas also noticed that his relationships with friends and family began to improve naturally. Without the previous pressure to rely on others for his happiness, his interactions became more relaxed, genuine, and meaningful. He could listen, share, and enjoy companionship without feeling incomplete when he returned home to his quiet apartment. The freedom he had cultivated within himself allowed him to show up more fully for others, not as someone who needed validation, but as someone who had already found fulfillment inside. By this point, Lucas had begun to embrace a life of balance, alone yet connected, independent yet compassionate, peaceful yet engaged. He discovered that happiness alone wasn't about constant cheer or excitement. It was about cultivating contentment, curiosity, and self-compassion every day. It was about learning to enjoy his own company, accept his own imperfections, and celebrate the person he was becoming. And as he sat one evening on the balcony of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker and listening to the distant hum of life, he felt a quiet pride in the journey he had taken. He whispered softly to himself, "I don't need anyone else to complete me. I am enough. I am whole. I am happy in my own life." By now, Lucas had fully embraced the idea that being alone could be liberating rather than lonely. He no longer feared empty evenings or quiet weekends. Instead, he greeted them with anticipation, knowing they were opportunities to recharge, reflect, and create. He filled his days with things that brought him joy, no matter how small: brewing a perfect cup of tea, sketching a scene from his walk, experimenting with a new recipe, or simply sitting on the balcony and watching the city breathe around him. Happiness alone, he realized, wasn't about avoiding the world. It was about finding fulfillment within it. He noticed that his perspective on friendships and relationships had changed too. He no longer sought companionship out of desperation or fear of solitude. When he spent time with friends, he was present and engaged, enjoying their company without expecting it to define his mood or validate his worth. And when he returned home to his apartment, he didn't feel empty or restless. Instead, he felt grounded, secure in the knowledge that his own presence was enough. The love he had learned to give himself had created a stable foundation for everything else in his life. One particularly quiet evening, Lucas found himself sitting by the river near his apartment, a soft breeze carrying the scent of rain-washed grass. The city lights reflected in the water like tiny sparks of hope. He thought about how far he had come, from the restless, anxious man who avoided being alone, to someone who relished solitude and used it to grow. He reflected on the journal he had found in the thrift store, the walks, the small rituals, and the quiet moments of self-reflection
that had taught him how to enjoy his own company. He realized that happiness alone wasn't an act of denial, but a conscious choice to honor himself, nurture his passions, and embrace his independence without guilt. Lucas smiled as he whispered to himself, "I can be complete on my own. I can be joyful, peaceful, and fulfilled, even when no one else is around." And for the first time, those words didn't feel like an aspiration, they felt like reality. He had discovered that life alone could be rich, vibrant, and meaningful. He had learned that being content with oneself was not a lack of ambition or connection, but a profound freedom, a rare gift that most people spent a lifetime searching for. Sitting there by the river, watching the last light fade from the sky, Lucas felt a deep gratitude for the lessons he had learned, for the quiet moments that revealed his strength, and for the journey that led him to embrace the man he had always been but never truly known. He understood now that happiness alone wasn't about isolation, it was about presence, self-love, and the courage to live fully in one's own company. And in that quiet realization, he felt complete, whole, and at peace. Thank you for watching Wisped Tales. If this story inspired you or helped you see the beauty of being alone, please like and subscribe. Next time we'll bring you another story filled with hope, reflection, and lessons you can carry into your own life. Remember, your happiness begins with yourself. Cherish it, nurture it, and never be afraid to enjoy your own company.